Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. Crypto markets plummeting this morning with XRP getting as low as $1.93 as of the time that I'm recording this. Headline on your screen here explains it. In case you hadn't heard the news, yes, something happened. Crypto market liquidations top $701 million as U.S. strikes hit Iran's nuclear facilities. So I'm going to share with you some initial reaction on this. If you're wondering if you should be concerned about this, from a market perspective, the answer in my estimation, almost certainly not. And I feel very strongly on that, and I'll explain why. Now, as far as the real world implications of this, obviously any sort of war, military strikes, we could probably all agree, not desirable, sometimes necessary. I will not be opining on whether or not this was a good thing or bad thing on this channel, because that's not the purpose of this YouTube channel. So whether you personally think that this is a good development or a bad development, I respect your perspective, but I won't be opining on that. I will only be speaking about these real world events, and insofar as to the degree to which they're actually impacting markets, specifically here, our beloved XRP. But before going further, I do want to be clear, I do not have a financial background of any kind. I'm not offering financial advice, and you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. All right, as I record this video, it is now 10:30 a.m. Central Time on the dot, Sunday, June 22nd, 2025. XRP is $1.95. Bitcoin is $99,416. So quite a drop over the last 24 hours. Here you can see 24-hour high, $2.12 for XRP, 24-hour low of $1.93. Are we done with this drop? Maybe, maybe not. More on that in a second here. Here's the Bitcoin over the last 24 hours. Is high at $103,741, 24-hour low of $99,363. So certainly a notable drop here. Altcoins getting battered across the board. I mean, not literally all of them, but generally getting battered a lot worse than Bitcoin here. Market cap for the entire asset class down what? What was it 24 hours? It's got to be down at least a couple hundred bill, if not $300 billion. It's somewhere in that range anyway. So it's pretty wild. This is a notable capitulation event. Now, it's interesting because, if you were looking in the charts, chart analysts said something like this was happening, it was going to happen, and then a real world event caused it. So you could certainly argue if you want to, that chart analysts don't know what the hell they're talking about. It's just a coincidence that this happens, that it lines up with the way that they were saying the charts are going to play out. But, in reality, if this hadn't happened, then we could have seen the price drop in the future anyway, even if it took another day or two or 3 or a week or a few weeks or a month. Because if there's pressure in this direction, the chart analysts will argue that it was going to happen anyway. And it's just that this happens to be the catalyst that caused us to drop here. And I know that chart analysts will argue as proof that what they're saying is correct, that the key levels that they called in advance of this, because we didn't know for sure that this was going to happen. It was on the radar. We knew this was possible. If you were paying attention to the news, you knew that this is something that might be happening. But as far as where prices dropped, whether you're talking about Bitcoin, XRP, they're dropping to key levels that were cited by tons and tons and tons of reputable chart analysts. So, and you can see this too, because there are clear areas where there are pockets of deep liquidity. And so it's not surprising then that when there is an event that triggers it, in this case, there really was an event, it's not surprising to see, prices cascade down to key levels. So this is a flush out. It just caused it to happen sooner than it otherwise would have. I having followed chart analysts for the better part of a decade at this point, I know that's the type of thing that they'd argue, and I think that argument's compelling. So if you don't think that it's true, fine, you can title their own opinion. I find the arguments compelling because they keep hitting these key levels. But this is, in the end, just a capitulation event. All right. And there is this post from Raoul Pal, former Goldman Sachs executive, founder of Real Vision and a global macro investor. He and his crew are the guys that got me really paying attention to global M2 and how it impacts equity markets, and specifically Bitcoin and the broader crypto market. Here you can see, going back the last couple of years, how closely Bitcoin tracks what's happening in global M2. So this matters supremely. And we know that there's a lag time for the price of Bitcoin behind global M2, and it's just been tracking it. It doesn't mean that every individual, if you look at it on a micro scale, you might be like, this doesn't correlate. Yeah, but then you zoom out and use your eyeballs and you can see that it does. And so directionally, Bitcoin does follow what's happening with global M2 directionally about 90% of the time. That's Raoul Paul's best estimate based on the actual data here. And so if you're wondering, did what happened today, throw this off? Does this matter? Well, no, not for markets. And so here he wrote, and this is just at 9:34 a.m. So just about an hour ago. He wrote, updated GMI BTC/M2 chart. Nothing seems unusual here, but please do not expect all wiggles to match or all timing points to be exact. It's the overall contextualization that matters the most. And yes, alts bleed more than Bitcoin in corrections. Spot on. So there's no reason to believe that just because there's this military strike that this is over. Now, I'll acknowledge, for anybody that's concerned, I'll acknowledge there's a possibility that this could develop into a broader conflict globally, and that could cause markets to tank even further. But I would just tell you, typically when there are military actions that spook markets, it's a short-lived thing. It typically is. And there's no indication, at least at this point, that this is somehow going to result in, as they say, boots on the ground, which would obviously result in a much broader conflict and could really open up a can of worms. So I'm not pretending to know what's going to happen. I'm not going to make a prediction on that. I'm just sharing ideas with you. Historical perspective shows that when these things happen, it's, markets panic, it's a capitulation event, it's a buying opportunity, and then we move back up to the upside. And there have been tons of instances over the years under this president, and actually many other presidents, where there have been contained military strikes pointed towards various countries, and not the end of the world, didn't start a broader conflict, so on and so forth. Like this stuff happens. I mean, I remember when I was young, under Clinton, there were airstrikes against Afghanistan and Sudan. Well, so, I'm just saying, like, there's always going to be things, and yeah, they can. I'm not saying there's no risk of it opening it up into something bigger, but, so if you're worried about markets, these are things you're considering. I'm just saying, usually it's not going to be the case here. So I'm going to lean on that side if I had to guess that. As far as the impact of markets, whether it's today, tomorrow, it's going to bottom out very soon, and then we're just going to resume to the upside. We're going to look back on this and be like, oh, that was another buying opportunity. Here's a post from Credible Crypto from November 8th, 2022. After the market tanked after FTX, he said, the last thing you want to do right now is panic. Calm down, let things develop, think rationally, and take action once the full picture has been painted. And so that was the end of the world event there. The FTX collapsed. Oh my God, it's all over. People actually thought that. Except no. And so last night, after this news broke, Credible Crypto wrote, November 8th, 2022, collapse of FTX. Bitcoin price at the time of tweet, $17,500. Market bottom 10 days later at $15,500 and then rallied to $100,000 plus. War, invasion, hack, collapse, Bitcoin ban, new regs. I don't care what is worrying you. Panicking is not the solution. What helps you avoid panic? Focusing on the chart and key levels that you already mapped out ahead of time so you feel comfortable/confident in your positioning because you have clear levels of interest and invalidation to guide you regardless of what's going on in the world. Spot on. That is correct. I just don't think it makes sense to panic here. I really don't. Here's a post from the blockchain backer at 9:24 a.m., so just over an hour ago. Capitulating sea leg in motion. So if you've been following his content, you know that he's been warning that what's most probable is a final drop for Bitcoin into the 90,000s, perhaps. It could be $95,000, $98,000. In this case, we're a little above $99,000 at the moment. I don't know for sure if it's done. By the time you're watching this, things could be much worse price-wise. But everything I'm saying stands, even if the price is lower by the time you're watching this. So he was calling for this. So the fact that there happened to be a trigger, he's still saying that's a sea leg in the chart. It does, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I suspect that he would tell you whether it was this or this never happened and then you just let time pass and then it happened anyway. It was going to happen regardless. That would be my guess. And so I'd be curious if he does talk about that specifically. I would be very curious to hear his take on that. But I think that's what a lot of chart analysts are going to be arguing here. Either way, though, what we can see here is he's arguing this was it. Like the capitulation we've been waiting for before we pop to the upside, it's happening. And he did warn about XRP below $2. So here we are. Here's a post from chart analyst Bobby A. I won't deep dive into geopolitics or military conflict on this forum. I only write about it occasionally as it pertains to financial markets. What just occurred is macro bullish. Markets are paving the way for clear skies. There you go. I'm in line with that type of thinking as it pertains to markets. Here's a post from Casey Trades. XRP just nailed the $2.01 support. And by the way, this is at 7:38 p.m. last night, so there's been some more developments. We know that it went lower, but I think the thinking stands still. It says, we're hearing that U.S. just bombed Iran, and right as expected, XRP hits its first major fib support at $2.01. We've been tracking this move for weeks. This is not a coincidence. The drop out of consolidation completed cleanly, and $2.01 held beautifully. We're now seeing a bounce begin with bullish divergence on both the 15-minute and 1-hour RSI. This is exactly what we want to see at a pivotal moment. Momentum is building. A clean RSI trend line is forming on the 1-hour that we'll be using to track the trend. Be careful, we don't have confirmation on the 4-hour or daily yet. That means if this bounce fizzles, the next supports are $1.90 and $1.55. They are still in play. The algos are testing reactions at these levels, and we need to get into the $3 area for confirmation. Okay, so it did go lower after that. Got down again to $1.93 as of the time I'm recording this. She was warning that that absolutely could happen. This isn't surprising. Won't change big picture what happens. We're just setting up a base of support before XRP pops above $3, ultimately enters price discovery and melts faces. Nothing has changed, folks. Here's a post from XR Punky. This is from 6:14 p.m. after the news last night. It says, now that XRP has dipped down to $1.99, will we still go lower to the zone I indicated? I mentioned that $1.80 to $2 is still a possible retracement before going higher. So, folks, what you'll keep seeing is analysts that are worth anything are going to recognize, regardless of what caused this, in this case, yeah, there was a real-world event, doesn't change the key levels that are being tracked. Doesn't change it. Please understand, that's a key takeaway. It doesn't matter what caused this, the key levels are still intact. Because there's still those pockets of liquidity. They existed before, and this is the trigger, and now we're seeing things play out in the way that you would have expected, regardless of the trigger. Right? Here's a post from Crypto Insight UK. He was warning just this literally yesterday before the news broke, Bitcoin into the 90,000s. Talked about this. He was warning about XRP below $2. And then in this post from 8:37 a.m., so just about 2 hours ago, it says, looking more promising / getting closer to a low for XRP. Still a little more to go, I think. It looks like people have stepped in with leverage a little early. Maybe they get pushed out. Unconfirmed yet, we see a spike in open interest whilst funding is still green. Large spot buying incoming, which is positive for a bottoming area. Funding also flipping negative. Okay, so this is the type of price action he was looking for, and we're getting it, right? This is good to see. Here's a post from chart analyst Zoom. This is at 6:43 p.m. last night after the news broke. He says, now that XRP has swept the $2 zone, what's next? Well, the $1.80 to $1.90 zone are extremely strong buy walls. If closed below that, a free fall to a $1.55 is not crazy to think about. But, as mentioned in the post below, I don't see XRP dropping below $1.80. Okay, so it could be lower by the time you're watching this. This is not a time to freak out. It doesn't change anything on a macro scale. This is going to flush out the market. And then I fully anticipate that the most likely thing, though not certain, is that market's going to rebound and we're going to have the final parabolic move for Bitcoin. Altcoins are going to follow. XRP hits new all-time high, melts faces, and then we land on the moon happily ever after with our Lambos. That's it. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.